Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses distress markers for a fall card. I'm using this Simon Says Stamp Leaves and Scribble set. I'm not using the solid images, I'm just using the ones that have the scribbles in them. And then I've got this Summer Greetings. It's not summer, but I'm just going to use this Thanks die. Okay, so I'm going to start off by taking 3 of those leaves and coloring them with my markers. I'm using Wild Honey, and I'm going to go from light to dark, and I'm just kind of randomly placing the color down. And in the video you can actually see where the marker is laying down color, but in real life I actually can't see it, so you can see that I'm coloring over some of the stuff I've already colored. But I'm just estimating it. It's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just to get all 3 of the colors just randomly applied to the stamp. And all my leaves are going to have green stems. So the green is actually Forest Moss. And the yellow, I can't remember if I mentioned, that's Wild Honey. And this is Fired Brick. Those are my 3 favorite distress fall colors. And as you can see, I'm coloring over my previous coloring. So you don't need to worry about contaminating the tip of your marker. You just take a piece of scratch paper and color on it. And I did have a little bit of the green on my red, but it came right off when I colored on a piece of scratch paper. Alright, so after I'm done coloring the stamp, I'm going to take some water and I'm going to hold it about a foot away from the stamp, and I'm going to give it 1 small spritz, and just to wet it up just a little bit. I don't want too much water because I do want an image. If you have too much water, your image is going to kind of go away. So you can see what I'm going to end up with is some water and then also parts of the image. So to blend that all together, you could actually leave it just like this, but I wanted to fill in some of the white areas. And by using this scribbles part and not the solid image, I was able to also maintain a little bit of an image underneath, and I could leave some of those white areas white if I wanted to. I just like the way the look was of this. It kind of gave me more freedom in how I blended the color. Anyway, so I'm just going to take my aqua painter, which has a water tube that I squeeze to get water out of the brush, and blend these colors together. And I didn't really have, there's not a whole lot of ink on there, so I didn't feel like I needed to wipe it on a tissue in between colors, but you certainly could. I just did it at the end of the leaf. And now I'm going to do my next one. I'm going to go through this process on all of the leaves, just kind of randomly placing them on my paper. My paper is 90 pound Strathmore watercolor paper, and that way the colors will blend easily because it's watercolor paper. I wanted to show you up close exactly how much water I have on this. You can sort of see, it's not too much. You don't see it pooling up. Anyway, so I'm going to randomly place this. I always have a hard time figuring out when I'm doing random stuff, which is the good location. So anyway, you can just go through this process, and I do clean off each of the stamps. So if I'm doing the next stamp again, I will clean it off and start all over. You don't want to put color on top of color. So here I am blending this second one out, and I can fill in any gaps where I might have missed coloring my stamp with the marker. You can just experiment with different colors. I think orange would also be a good color, maybe spice marmalade. Okay, so after I'm done with all my leaves, I'm just going to put some ink on my craft mat. I'm using my Fired Brick and my Forest Moss. I just went ahead and used my markers, but you could use your ink pads if you have them. And I'm using kind of a wide, flatter brush to do my splatters. And what I like to do is put the ink on the craft mat and then wet my brush. So I'm not actually going to spray my craft mat with water because I'm fearful I'm going to get too much water. So as you can see here, I'm not getting enough water. There aren't going to be enough splatters coming out, but I like to be conservative at first, because the last thing you need is a whole bunch of giant splatters going down that is going to ruin your image. So I like to kind of take it slow when I'm doing this. So now I've got more water, and the splatter is coming out, and it's nice and small, which is what I want. I didn't want a lot of big dots. So if you want just a little splatter, use a little bit of water, and if you want a lot, use more water. Now with the green, I had a little bit more water, so it was easier. My brush was also wetter, so I decided to add a little bit more red. I didn't do the yellow because I just didn't think it was going to show up, so I just stuck with the green and the red. And somehow I did manage to get a big water spot, but I just took a tissue and wiped it up quickly. And so anyway, so that's going to be my splatter. I'm going to let that dry and move on to the sentiment. So I'm using the Thanks die, and I'm just going to use some early espresso from Stampin' Up and run that through my die machine. And then I cut a piece of Strathmore watercolor paper because it's a little bit off-white and I wanted it to match my watercolor panel. So I just used a pencil to mark where I needed to cut it, and it doesn't have to be exact because it's going to be behind my sentiment, so I just cut it with a scissor and I'm going to lay it on top. So I use my 2-way glue pen. I use this all the time. I love it because you can get really precise application of the glue. So I'm just going to dot the back of it here. I'm going to grab my tweezers because it's really easy to place things with tweezers. Your fat fingers don't get in the way, and press that nice and firm. Okay, next I'm going to put a little pencil dot right there so I know where I'm going to be punching a hole. And I'll punch a hole. This is a 1/8 of an inch Fiskars punch. And the reason why I'm punching this big hole instead of just piercing it with a paper piercer is because I'm going to be putting some thread in here 3 times. So I'm going to put some adhesive on the back here right next to my hole, and that's where my linen thread is going to stick. And so I've got my Stampin' Up! Linen thread. I'm going to take off enough to put it in the hole, so I'm putting it down into the hole, and then I'll adhere it to that tape runner I just put on there. Just press it down. And then I'll leave enough length so that it can wrap around the watercolor panel, and I'll just trim it with a scissor. And I'm going to do this 3 times. So 3 times all the way through, and I'm just kind of pulling what's already in there to the side, and that leaves enough room because it is 1/8 of an inch, it's pretty wide, to get all 3 of these pieces in. Now, my linen thread tends to get these bend marks in it when it wraps around the cardboard. To get that out, all you have to do is squeeze it between your thumbnail and your finger just 1 time, just kind of run it through, and it'll straighten it right out. So I'm just going to do that 3 times for all these bend marks, and you'll see it straightens right out. Alright, so I'm going to put that off to the side, and then I'm going to take my watercolor panel and I'm going to trim this on either side. So I actually started with a larger piece so that I would have some wiggle room in where I wanted to trim it. And then I'm just going to take my ATG and put it on the back there, and I'm going to adhere it to some early espresso cardstock. And I want to show you my new way for using the MISTI. I'm so excited about this. I'm using it as kind of a ruler and alignment tool for adhering panels. So I'm going to place my base panel in the lower corner, and then I'm going to take my watercolor panel and I'm just going to push it against that left edge. And that's going to make sure that my top is perfectly aligned, and if your panels are cut straight, you will get a perfect mat. I am so excited about this, and it's even better if you're covering the whole thing because you could put both pieces in the lower left hand corner and it comes out great. So anyway, you'll see me using that a lot in the future. So I'm going to take a dimensional, which is just a foam adhesive, and I'm going to put it on top of my watercolor panel. This is my card base, which is a piece of crumb cake cardstock. I'm just estimating where it's going to be so I know how far around I need to wrap that linen thread. So I'm going to stick this dimensional on there so I can get it partially on. So I'm get it aligned, and then I'll press it down. Now I'm not adhering to my card base yet. I need to adhere my linen thread around this panel. So I'm just going to take some adhesive and I'll place it on the back. I'm going to put a bunch of lines here to make sure I have enough to capture all 3 of the threads. And now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to align them up. So I'm going to start with the center one, the one that's in the middle, and I'm going to pull it straight across and wrap it around. Then I'll take the top one and angle it upwards and wrap that around. And then I'll take my final one and angle it downward and wrap it around. And that way you get exactly them wrapped just the same distance apart, and you can adjust it a little bit once it's done. So I'm just going to trim off those edges, and then I'm going to finish off the dimensionals on my sentiment. And then I'll take my ATG and put some adhesive on the back of my espresso panel. And I'll bring back my card base here and my MISTI, and I'm just going to put my card base in the corner and line up those left edges and make sure my top of the sentiment is hitting the right side of my card, and that'll be it. And I didn't have to remove any of the panels to align them differently, so I'm really excited about that. Anyway, so that's the card for today. I love the distress markers in the fall, and it's getting kind of cool out here in Dallas, which is really nice. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.